look forward to Fridays at 4 p.m. I hope you all are looking forward to these events as well. This is our 6th show of the season. We've got 2 more to go before we wrap it up. And we had a great feature last week where we talked to Kevin McFall and Mohammed Al-Adhari, where we learned about autonomous vehicles. And we've got another exciting feature for you today. My name is Phaedra Corso, and I'm Vice President for Research. And the reason why we're doing these episodes is to feature our outstanding faculty at KSU, but also to stay connected as scholars and researchers. So a few housekeeping tips before we start. The first housekeeping tip, and I say these every time, which is to please make sure that your mic is muted while the speaker is presenting and while we're listening to the video. Second, if you want to focus on a particular speaker, you just need to search for that person's name and in the list of participants and pin that person using the 3 dots next to the person's name. We actually have a new feature with Teams this week. For those of you who've been on millions of team meetings like myself, you'll notice that more than one person can show up. I think we can have up to 9, I think I've seen so far, which should make the answer in questions section at the end, I think, pretty exciting. And then finally, I just want to remind you that we are recording this episode, and it will be available at our website later on this evening, and it will also be available on our YouTube page. So the schedule for the next hour is similar to what we've done on other shows, which is that we're going to see a short video. And followed by the video, I will start with questions for our featured guest, and then we'll open it up to all the participants. And just as a reminder, if you are shy and or you're in your pajamas and don't want to show your face for the question, you can send your question through the chats function, and I'll be reading those off as we go along. Finally, before we get started, I want to, Heather, if you want to show our marketing yellow card. I just want to remind everyone that if you have not yet had a chance to look at our spring 2020 issue of the Investigator Research magazine, we really encourage you to do so. We have tried to be fiscally responsible this year in not producing as many hard copies of the magazine, so we're very much relying on distribution through the digital edition. So if you have not shared this with your family and friends yet, we encourage you to do so. So thank you for that. Okay, with that, let me go ahead and introduce our featured faculty member. So Dr. Phil Kiernan is an associate professor of art history in the School of Art and Design in the College of the Arts. Phil is the founding chair of the college's Research Advisory Board that was established this last fall. So showing you that even in the arts, research with relevance is an important function at KSU. He also participated in a program that we started this year, which is called the First Year Scholars Program. So he served as a mentor, and he launched in the fall to give an immersive research experience to first-year students. Phil received his PhD in classical archaeology from the Ruprecht Karls Universität Heidelberg, or the University of Heidelberg in Germany, and he's been at KSU since 2016. His research is on the art and archaeology of the Roman Empire and involves archaeological fieldwork as well as work with statues, bronze artifacts, and coins. And just to do a shameless plug for Phil, if this doesn't come up later, he has just published a book, which maybe we'll have a graphic of the cover of that book towards the end. But his book is called, well, maybe it's going to come up right now. Yes, so it's called Roman Cult Images, The Lives and Worship of Idols from Iron Age to Late Antiquity. And he published this with Cambridge University Press. So congratulations to you, Phil. And then, as always, I'm just going to throw out my thank yous in advance to StratCom for helping us prepare this video, Crystal Bailey and Dale Goldberg. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Heather, to start the video.
I've always been fascinated by what artifacts and artworks can tell us about life in the distant past. Both my research and teaching involve students conducting hands-on work with ancient objects, either in museums, archives, libraries, or on archaeological excavations. My research is focused on the art and archaeology of the Roman Empire. In 2018, I began a new project that involves the excavation of a Roman temple at Wareswald, a site in Germany some 2 hours west of Frankfurt and not far from the French border. This project is a collaborative effort with a local non-profit archaeological company called Terex, who have been managing and excavating the site since 2001. Together, we are exploring the area around a temple to Mars that was excavated earlier. The goal of this work is to help us reconstruct the experiences of worshippers and pilgrims by combining the diverse information that the excavation yields. Wareswald was once a small Roman town, occupied from the 1st to the 4th centuries AD. Today, the site is both a natural forest and an archaeological preserve, which local community leaders envision becoming another attraction in what is increasingly a popular holiday spot within the Saarland. The temple excavated by Terex is a so-called Romano-Celtic temple, an architectural form that was common in Rome's western provinces and that borrows architectural elements from Roman and pre-Roman Celtic buildings. These elements consist of a gallery and a central tower-like cella in which an image of the god was housed. At Wareswald, a paved or a cobbled street led up to the temple's entrance on its east side. The Wareswald temple produced numerous incredible finds. These include a remarkable bronze statuette of a dog and several more statuettes depicting Mars himself, the Roman god of war, to whom the temple was probably dedicated. Temples like this rarely occur alone, but are normally part of a larger sanctuary complex, with several temples for different divinities, as well as related features such as altars and functional buildings. With this in mind, the KSU pilot project explored the area around the Mars Temple in 2018 and 2019. As our student volunteers slowly removed earth from the area around the temple, the foundations of walls and buildings that had been hidden for hundreds of years were exposed. The procedure is slow and deliberate, with each find carefully recorded and photographed as the excavation proceeds. One of our first discoveries was a large sandstone base set just to the side of the street leading up to the Mars Temple. The circular hole in the base suggests it was connected to underwater pipes and perhaps supported a fountain in which pilgrims could wash as they approached the temple. The full results of both campaigns can be best interpreted from this drone image. The street that approaches the Mars Temple continues eastwards, with the fountain base just to the north of it. A series of walls uncovered in our excavations can now be interpreted as part of an earlier Romano-Celtic temple, with the distinctive gallery and cella. This second temple must have been demolished before the Mars Temple, road, and fountain were built. It may well have been one of the earliest temples in Wareswald. This kind of renovation and change was common in Roman sanctuary complexes, which were actively used for hundreds of years. KSU students also found numerous artifacts that reflect activities that took place near these temples. Perhaps the most sensational of these were several iron spearheads, which were likely offerings brought by worshippers, perhaps soldiers retiring from service in the Roman army who were dedicating their old weapons to Mars. When found in an excavation, iron objects like spearheads are a fragile and ugly mass of rust that must be carefully excavated. By X-raying them, we can see through that rust and distinguish between interesting objects like spearheads and less exciting objects such as nails. This conservation activity takes place in the laboratory of the State Archaeological Service of the Saarland. Shortly before we arrived in 2018, the Terex team had uncovered a remarkable hoard of 23 finger rings from one of the houses at Wareswald. The rings had been carefully strung together on a thin piece of copper wire, perhaps by the craftsman who had made them or by a merchant who sold them. These rings have since been conserved, and I will be working on their publication together with our German colleagues. Just after we left in 2019, another sensational discovery was made at the site, this time in a building that might well have been a hostel or an inn that was connected to the temples. It is a sandstone statue of the goddess Fortuna, the Roman goddess of chance. She holds a cornucopia and a rudder, indicating her ability to steer our fate and to provide us with good things. Archaeology is truly interdisciplinary work. Students majoring in any subject can participate in this project. In addition to excavating and learning about the past, students produce drawings similar to those used by architects, use surveying equipment, work with ground-penetrating radar, process digital images, fly drones, and produce photogrammetric 3D models. This modern equipment and methodology helps us build a better picture of ancient life. Cultural heritage is a growing sector in the United States and the world as a whole. The yearly excavation festival in Wareswald is a good illustration of why. It draws several hundred visitors to the site and the region on a single day, and many more will visit and explore the site in the course of the year. Our work there has both cultural and economic relevance to the region. This project would not be possible without the support of our German collaborators and friends, and I'm especially indebted to Dr. Klaus-Peter Hens of Terex and the staff of the State Archaeological Service of the Saarland. Research projects like this not only help us to understand the past, but also provide our students with unique international experience. It's an experience that will make these students stand out wherever their careers take them.
Wow, that was great. Okay, there you are, Phil. So you're
Right.
our own, you can hear me okay?
I can hear you okay. Can you hear me?
I can.
Great.
So you're our own resident Indiana Jones. That's how I'm going to think of you from this point forward. And so let me start off by asking about the students. So you made a comment in the video that students with all sorts of backgrounds could work with you or do work with you. Who exactly have you worked with in terms of students at KSU? Oh.
That's strange. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, it muted itself. Yeah, that's right. We've had 2 seasons now, just sort of pilot projects with KSU that involved just 5 students in those 2 pilot projects. And then we were planning to take 10 students this coming summer when Fortuna did not smile on us and the COVID-19 crisis caused that to be postponed to 2021. But of those 10, they were quite an interdisciplinary group. We had some art historians, of course. In the past, they've made up the bulk of the excavators, but we also had engineers who I was particularly keen on because of their AutoCAD skills. We had 2 architecture students, an anthropologist. So really anyone who has a serious interest, we're very happy to take on a project like this.
And so I've always wanted to be an archaeologist. Probably 99% of the people on this call wanted to be an archaeologist at some point in their childhood. It seems like something everybody wants to be, that and an astronaut. But what is it really like for a student? So can you take me through the day in the life of a student that's working on a big dig like this? It's not Indiana Jones, is it?
No, not quite. I rarely have to fight the undead or anything like that. So it involves getting up early. We have a big breakfast. In this case, the students are housed and fed in a youth hostel not far from the site. Then we travel to the site and we get to work. And that can involve spending the whole day removing large quantities of earth, pushing wheelbarrows, or it can involve spending the day carefully scratching away with your trowel to expose walls. It might involve using surveying equipment, such as a total station that a surveyor uses. We use that to map finds, both the walls and the small objects. Or it might involve taking digital photos. And at the end of the dig, it'll involve a lot of drawing. We do a sort of special architectural drawing of the walls, a scale drawing that we then later on digitize. So I guess once you're done all that, at the end of the day, to round off your day, we take you back to the youth hostel, and then the students fight for who gets to go first in the shower, and they're usually pretty tired by then.
Thanks, Phil. And you talked a little bit about your collaborators in Germany, but I'm curious to know who is interested in funding this type of research?
Yeah, we've been very fortunate with this project. We received a matching grant from Atlanta's Hala Foundation to expand these pilot projects. So we had 3 years of very generous support from the Hala Foundation in the form of matching money. But it's really tricky to find money for projects like this in North America. I've just applied for a fellowship that will help me study the finds, but that won't support the dig. The kind of grants that we can really apply to are pretty limited. So it may be that what we really need here is a private sponsor who's willing to help make experiences like this possible for KSU students and to help match the money that's been so kindly provided by Hala.
Mm-hmm. And are you collaborating with any other faculty at KSU?
Yes, we've just started a new collaboration for this summer with Tim Frank in architecture. And this is a way of helping those students who are unable to go. So since we can't take them there in reality, we're going to take them there virtually. And I have some students who will be processing hand drawings, transforming them into digitized drawings, into AutoCAD and Rhino drawings, thanks to Professor Frank.
Another great example of interdisciplinary research at KSU. So thanks for that.
Archaeology is extremely interdisciplinary.
Let's talk about the site itself. You showed some pictures are a little bit small in the video, but I'd like to hear a little bit more from you on, in your professional experience, what is the most exciting thing that you've uncovered so far?
Well, at Wareswald, in terms of the KSU excavation, that's probably going to be the spearheads. We found 6 or 7 of them, as well as this fountain. But literally, as we were preparing this video, our colleagues in Germany, who've just started digging again, made a sensational discovery. And I wonder if we could take this opportunity to show it. Heather's bringing up the picture. There it is on the right, in the same area that this statuette of Fortuna, who you may notice doesn't have a head, was found. They've uncovered what is very likely the head of this statue. This is a really unusual and incredible moment in archaeology when you find 2 pieces of the same statue. So that's really wonderful.
And so what happens with the pieces that you find, Phil? Do they go into your apartment?
I wish.
Right? Or do they come to KSU and they sit somewhere on display at KSU? Like, what happens here?
So once something sensational like this is discovered, it's taken straight to the State Archaeological Services Depot. And there they have a professional archaeological conservator who will look after it, clean it in a professional way. That's where the X-rays of iron objects take place. And it'll stay there for a while, and then really sensational pieces like this, and I believe that's the case with the statue here, they may be displayed in a museum in Saarbrücken, the nearest big city, so that the public can see and enjoy them.
And does it make you sad that they're in your grasp for a second and they're gone? Do you, is there any marker that's in the museum that says, found by, or, thanks to, or anything like that? Or, it's just in your hands and then it's gone?
It's not about keeping it or about the credit. It's about the discovery, and it's about what the discovery can tell us about the past. So in this case, or in any of the other finds, no, I don't really have a sense of regret. I'm just happy that we could contribute to reconstructing the past.
And tell me a little bit about your training, because I think when I first met you and learned about your research, it didn't compute to me that you were coming out of a College of the Arts. Maybe that's typical, but do you have interdisciplinary training, and how did you land at KSU in given the training that you have and the interdisciplinary nature of what you're doing?
Sure. So I am in the College of the Arts, and I teach art history in our art history BA program. And those programs are sometimes in a College of the Arts, sometimes they're in a humanities department. But my background is in classical archaeology. And I'm also the director of our interdisciplinary minor in classical studies, which you can do here at KSU. So that's a program between several departments where people focus on the ancient world. And yeah, my training is indeed kind of diverse. I came from a classics department to KSU, so I used to teach things like Latin and history, as well as art history and archaeology. And that's quite normal for people who work on the Roman Empire or who work on the ancient world as a whole.
All right, my last question, I'm going to open it up because I'm sure everyone is chomping at the bit to ask you questions. But I know a little bit about Greek mythology and Greek history. You're talking about Roman digs. What is the primary architectural difference, I guess, between the two within the same time period?
Yeah, it's a good question. So if you've had a little exposure to the Greek and Roman world and you heard this was going to be a talk about a temple, you might have been expecting a very different kind of architecture. So you might have expected a sort of podium with columns on it made of marble. And that's certainly the norm in the ancient world if you live in Greece or if you live in Italy or Rome itself or even North Africa and the Middle East. But the western half of the Roman Empire had this different architecture. And it's inspired by the Celtic roots, we think, of that region. We have this form with a tower surrounded by a gallery that's a little bit different. And that was actually the norm for the people who lived in Gaul, who lived in Britain, who lived in Germany. They had this unusual Romano-Celtic temple form that for them was more normal than the podium-style temple that you are more used to when you think of the classical world.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to participants for questions. We've got one that's come in already, and the question is, how old are the spears and the statue of Fortuna that you showed in the video?
Yeah, thank you. This is a good question. So Fortuna is probably the easier one to answer. She's surely late 2nd to early 3rd century AD. It's a tricky to date stone. There's no scientific technique we can use. We just have to go on comparison to similar sculptures, but that's my guess. She's probably sometime between AD 150 and 250. That's probably a pretty safe bet for Fortuna. Now the spearheads, same problem. You can't date them by any kind of scientific technique. If you're lucky and you've got a little bit of the wood still, a little bit of the shaft still in the spearhead, you might be able to carbon date that, but not the iron itself. So there again, it's much harder, and the answer is I don't know. The strange thing about these spears is normally Romans don't dedicate weapons. So this is a bit unusual. There's a long Celtic tradition of dedicating weapons in temples, but what's going on at Wareswald is surely a little bit special, and I just can't give you a date. So I'll say 1st century AD to late 4th century AD, which is when the site was occupied, so I can't go far wrong.
Okay, great. There's a lot of questions coming in, but I would like to I'd like to open it up for live questions, and I think I see Ian's face. There he is.
Hi.
Well, I can ask a question if you like. So I don't know how far this site was away from Trier, because I believe Trier was the major Roman site in Germany. It doesn't look like it was too far away. Trier is also famous because Karl Marx came from there. But
right.
What was the distance, and was there some type of linear Roman road between these sites, and was this on a line towards Rome, for example? And what was the relationship to Trier?
Great question. So all roads lead to Rome. We know that. But Wareswald itself sits on an important intersection of roads that probably connect Metz, Koblenz, and Trier. And you're right, you've got the geography perfect. Trier, Augusta Treverorum, it's the local capital. It's the capital of the province of Gallia Belgica, and some people call it the Rome of the West. It's just full of amazing archaeological monuments. So we can be certain the people living in Wareswald saw Trier as the nearest big town. They'd go there to watch gladiatorial combats or do their major shopping purchases, one would imagine. And that's where we take the students on weekends. So we do a series of site tours when the students aren't digging to not wear them out. And we go to Trier at least once and show them the museum, the amphitheater, all the things that a Roman big city would have. We're excavating a Roman little city. Thank you.
Great.
And
Thank
I have
you.
one quick question, which is a trivia question. I was always told that the word trivia came from the fact that when you had 3 roads or Roman roads coming together, trivia, that they would post information there. And that's where the word trivia came from. Rather than, there's a Latin word trivials, which means commonplace, but somebody once told me that trivia meant it was this intersection of Roman roads.
Uh-oh. So having taught Latin, I guess I should know, and I have no clue, but it makes sense, I suppose, if you have a tri-via, and that's where you've got to choose between 3 roads. I could buy the etymology of it, but I admit I'm stumped.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the obscure, the obscure question, Ian. Anybody else want to ask a question? All right, I'll just jump in because we've got several that have come in here. Oh, this is a great question. You found amazing materials at the site. Have you had any trouble with looters? And how do you deal with looters?
Yeah, good. Yes, it's a problem. The big problem in Germany can be metal detectorists who come at night and see if they can find some coins or other great stuff that they can sell on the market. They'd love to find some of those statuettes that we found. So yes, they've been an issue, not a major issue, thank goodness, at Wareswald. My last site I dug in Germany had very big problems with looters, but here we've been lucky so far. And there's not a lot you can do. You can't be sitting on your site 24/7, but you can do things like cover up when you're done. And hope for the best. If there's a real problem, you can inform the local police. But we've had nothing like that in Wareswald so far. Thank goodness. People around there are honest.
Again, anybody want to ask questions, just interrupt me, but I'm going to keep going to the chats until you interrupt. Here's a question. What happened to Wareswald in the end? Wareswald in the end.
Wareswald, yeah.
Wareswald.
Good question. So going by the coins, the range of coins they find there, they seem to stop in the late 4th century. And that's quite common for sites like this. And people used to say that's because the barbarians came and killed everybody. We're less dramatic in our interpretation of the end of the Roman Empire these days. So it's probably more realistic to say there's some kind of economic change. There's a combination of barbarian invasions nearby and the sort of local economy is no longer sustainable, and these settlements are slowly abandoned. But we could have lengthy debates about why the Roman Empire collapses and why individual sites like Wareswald cease to work. KSU actually has an expert on the end of the Roman Empire, Professor Swain, over in history. So I'll refer you to him for the bigger picture.
I have a question.
Yeah, go, Susan.
Did you find or will you look for?
Oops. I'm sorry, we've lost you.
Did you find or will you look for things like seeds or animal bones?
This is an excellent question. We probably should. We haven't yet. The conditions of the soil are not particularly conducive to preserving seeds well, bones. Oddly enough, the last dig we found hardly any, but they should be there. And that may well also be to do with the soil conditions. So there are methods in archaeology you can use. You can do flotation, where you put soil in water, then the seeds come up to the top. We can also look for pollen, but the chances are that's not going to be terribly productive at Wareswald just because of the nature of the soil.
Okay, thank you.
There's a question here about the use of drones. Do you use drones in your research?
Yes. Towards the end of each excavation, we have a nice picture, a nice exposed picture. All the walls are freshly cleaned, and we try and get the drone to take pictures of what we've excavated. And then eventually we'll be able to insert pictures like the ones you've seen. Heather, do you want to show photo number 6, slide number 6? Thank you. So here's a drone image of our excavation. It's that sector over on the left. And eventually we'll be able to insert images like this straight into AutoCAD and have them be in a kind of series of layers where you have our drawings and then these digital images and maybe later on things like 3D models as well. So that's the kind of thing that Professor Frank is helping us develop over the summer with some architecture and engineering students and a number of students from the Honors College.
There's a question here about KSU's relationship with the European Academy in Otzenhausen.
Otzenhausen is just nearby, and KSU has a long-standing relationship with them. Their focus is on the environment. So thus far, we've not had too much contact with them, although we did go and do a tour of a Celtic oppidum site, which is right next to Otzenhausen, that's also excavated by Terex. So that's something that might well come in the future. I'd welcome that if we could have more cooperation with the European Academy, but not yet. Stay tuned.
And Phil, your colleague from Germany, Christian, is in the chats, and I think this might represent our first international viewing of our Research with Relevance show, so yay to us.
Hello, Christian.
Anybody else have questions out there before I go back to the chats?
You wanted to ask Christian's question, or is he just saying hi?
He's saying hello, and he wishes you to come back soon.
I can't wait to come back. I wish I was there now.
So here's another question that's come in: is what brought you to this particular site in Germany? And I'm going to follow up with that question to ask you, what else are you doing? Is this the only site where you're working, or you've got other locations?
So the site was through a connection. An old friend of mine works for the State Archaeological Service, Constanza Hupken, and she connected me with Terex and thought we could have a great collaboration. And she was right. Both Terex and the Denkmalsamt, the Archaeological Service, they've been wonderful. To the second part of your question, do I have other projects? At the moment, that's the only one in Germany, but this project connects really well with another project I'm involved in. And we want to show slide number 3, please, Heather. So for the last 2 years, I've been involved with Kennesaw's Home Away from Home in Italy in Montepulciano. And I have been trying to get a number of projects involving the cultural heritage of Montepulciano going. And so far, this has involved a activity in which our students are creating digital scans of old manuscripts. So letters, books, documents from the 16th, 17th century, letters from people like the Medici, really exciting documents that are kept in the town archive and that are preserved only in this handwritten form. So we're trying to digitize them to preserve and study them. And then we're working on a collection, which you see on the right, of Etruscan and Roman inscriptions and reliefs that are built into the wall of one of the main arteries, one of the main streets of Montepulciano. This building's called the Palazzo Uccelli, and we're working on studying them. So this project takes place in May, typically. And then the long-term plan is that I'll be working in Montepulciano with our students in May, doing these cultural heritage projects there, and then traveling to Germany afterwards to do the dig in Germany.
In your professional opinion, Phil, what is the most exciting archaeological dig in the world right now, other than your own?
Oh. The most exciting.
I mean, of course, yours is going to be the most exciting, but I mean, in terms of what we're learning about history and about former civilizations.
I don't even know where to begin. There are so many wonderful archaeological projects going on in the world right now. It's just hard to answer. And the sad thing is, I don't know what's happening to all of them with this pandemic. So most of us dig in the summer, and I fear that's going to have a big influence on archaeology. So I can't answer. I'm blown away by the question.
Sorry, and I didn't prep you for that one. You know, it's just sorry about that.
I have an answer, but I don't.
It's a silly question. But speaking of COVID-19, so I know you had planned to bring students over to Germany this summer. I can't remember exactly what you said in the video, if you did, on what are the alternative plans for you for that particular dig.
So for the dig itself, we have a number of students who are going to be taking a class And as part of this class, they're going to be working on digital material from Wareswald. So we have the drawings that we made by hand in the field. We have photographs of objects. So those drawings of the walls and the site, we're going to be digitizing them, basically inserting them into either AutoCAD or Rhino, again, with the help of Professor Frank. So that work will continue. It's quite important. It's obviously not as thrilling as being on the site itself, but it's very important. And it means that when we come back in 2021, we'll be all the more prepared to have an amazing season in 2021 with some new tricks up our sleeve in terms of how we do our documentation.
Other questions?
I have one if everybody else is being quiet. So you started showing a layered structure there where something else was built over something else. I think a road over a temple or that. And when you start seeing those overlays of different pieces of archaeology from different time frames, is there a way that people will qualify or say which has the relative importance in terms of disturbing the layers as you go down through them?
Yeah, this is an excellent question, and I need a visual to answer it well. So, Heather, can you show us slide 6, please? So just to elucidate your question, on the right, you see 2 squares within a square. That's the Mars temple. And on the left, you see our road. Heather, can you move your mouse over the road? That's maybe a mean instruction. So if you go to the left of the Mars temple, yeah, that was it. That's right. Put your mouse there. So there's a road here, and that road is covering our own temple. So we know the second temple, our 2 squares, were built before the road. So clearly they were ruins, and then someone built the road. So your question is, how do we decide which one is archaeologically the best to keep? Do we want to keep a Roman road, a Roman street, or do we want to see the temple below it? And sometimes you have to decide. Sometimes one of them has to go. But there's a neat trick you can do to ensure that you can keep both. So one of them scientific. We can use tools like ground penetrating radar to get a look at what's beneath things before we actually dig them. But then we can also do cross sections where we dig a section through the road, destroying just a little bit of it, and then seeing what things look like in a profile from a kind of side view to give us a sense of what the stratigraphy is, what came before what in terms of building. And then we can make the tricky decisions. What do we keep? Does that make sense?
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, I'll jump in with the next one, which is what's inspired you to do this line of research to begin with? I can only imagine, but I want to hear from you.
Well, I'd always been really fascinated with the past. So I'm Canadian and I did my BA in classical studies. So I knew I was always going to study something about the ancient world. I wasn't sure whether it would be history or languages. And I found I really like that material connection, something you can hold, something you can touch. I used to do a lot of work with coins, and the idea that you can hold a coin that someone 2,000 years ago used to buy a beer or to buy an egg or something, that is just so incredible in that it makes the ancient world really seem alive. And I think that's what inspired me to go into archaeology, this idea that we could touch things that people had touched 2,000 years ago and try and make them live again almost in the way we can recreate using objects. And
so Phil, for your students who have an interest, sorry, I'm just going to keep the hat on. And I challenge Ian to find a hat to match mine, but just
looking to see if I have remains of mine here, but I don't think I do.
So for your students that come in and who do a dig with you and they get really excited about this, what is their trajectory in terms of their education? They don't, I'm sure there's many different paths to get to be where you are now, but where do you send our KSU students as their next step?
Yeah, this is a great question because as a art historian, I am always being told your students are never going to be employed. It's like the unemployable degree. And it's so untrue. Our art historians do really well. So those who come on the dig, they have a line on their CV and a set of experiences that set them up really well for the job market. Some of them will go into the cultural heritage sector. So many of my students have gone on to work for private companies that do what we call cultural resource management. They do excavations, they may be involved in museums. One of my students here at KSU is now the curator of the Marietta Cobb Art Gallery. So they do very well in terms of employment if they study art history. And even for those who don't, if you're an engineer or if you're a business major and you come on my excavation, you have a wonderful line on your CV and a wonderful real world experience that I think is going to put you ahead of other applicants when you're out there on the job market. So I'm always encouraging students to get involved in research projects like this or to do study abroad to make themselves that much more interesting when they go out and pursue their careers.
Absolutely. Other questions?
Yeah, actually, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, Phil. Thanks. This is great. Continuing on with what you said about touching the past, bringing the past to life. I was wondering if we could do a bit of social history, a bit of responsible historical imagination work, and if you could walk us through like the day in the life of a pilgrim going to this site, presumably a Gallo-Roman, maybe not, maybe from someone farther afield. What would they do when they went there? When would they go there? How would they interact with certain objects? But for example, that statue of Fortuna presumably wasn't just a knick-knack standing in a corner, but it served a purpose. Could you add a bit of texture about what went on at the site? Thanks.
Thanks. Happy to. So if you're a Roman, religion's something very close to home. It's not really separated from other aspects of your life, like the state or science. It is kind of the world you live in. And you might go to the temple for a number of reasons, but usually it's a pretty material reason. You want something from the gods. You want the gods to send you some money, to send you some good business, perhaps to heal an illness. Perhaps you just want to make sure the gods stay on your side so bad things don't happen to you. It's really a kind of cupboard love relationship with the gods. You go to them for material things. So when we look at sites like Wareswald, we can actually look at the sort of features we're finding and reconstruct what the individual experience would be like. So presumably you entered an enclosed sacred area that we haven't fully excavated yet, presumably along this street. Maybe not, but it looks like that might be the case. Then as you approach the temple, you passed a fountain. Perhaps you washed the dirt of the day off in the fountain before you then went up to the temple itself. And then in the temple, you might wander around the gallery. Perhaps you'd circulate praying or chanting or meditating, we don't know, in this gallery that goes around the main temple. And then finally, you'd either look inside or you would actually enter the temple itself where there's a statue. And that statue, presumably it's Mars in this case, maybe there's another temple coming up where it's Fortuna. For you as a Roman, it's not just a picture of the god, but somehow the god is living in it, him or herself. It's actually a statue that is divine. And so by speaking to it, by praying to it, by bringing it gifts, by bringing it nice things like perfume or coins or little statues as gifts, you can hope that the god will do you a favor in return. That maybe you'll strike a good business deal, or maybe that funny growth on your back will go away because you brought the god or goddess a present. So once you've concluded that business in the cella, it might be late at night and we think there's another building connected to the temple. Perhaps that's where the Fortuna statue was found. We're not sure yet. A sort of hotel that you can stay in, a place you can spend the night, and then the next day go on your way. So that might be a fictional sort of day in the life of a Roman pilgrim. I suppose you might also come on a festival day. You might come for a specific festival of the god or goddess, and then you're one of hundreds of people who've shown up to the temple for the feast day of whoever god or goddess it is, and then there'll be events for you for you there. So these temples could be an economic boon to towns like Wareswald as well, because they brought people in. Those pilgrims spent money, just as museum visitors spend money when they visit museums of Atlanta. That's why we have them in one way.
Hey Phil, it's Ivan.
Hi,
Can you talk a little bit about what skills students need to have and what kind of preparation they need to have before you can take them to a site like this and allow them to start doing the kind of work that is critically important to discover these treasures?
Thanks. It's a good question. So I like to say the main thing that I look for is serious dedication. They're seriously interested. They don't just want to come on my site and have a party in Germany. So they actually want to work. And that's often hard to distinguish when I look at student applicants. So it's nice for me if they've taken a class in art history with me or with one of my colleagues, then we have a sense of what kind of students they are. Sometimes, as we mentioned earlier, they have other skills that are really valuable for us on the dig. So we're quite keen to have people with engineering skills, with architecture skills, who can help us do those drawings and reconstructions as the digs go along. And I'm really keen to find students who want to stay long term. So once you've been there the first time, I really want you to come back. If you've been a good student, I want you to come back a second and a third time, and then you're more and more useful to me as this dig progresses. You become useful to me in helping prepare the publications of this site. So we're sort of mining the site for knowledge, which is going to be expressed in the form of publications. And that may involve having students produce drawings. So I've got art students who've done drawings of finds for me in the past, or it may help that you help create a 3D model using some photogrammetry software for us. So we're interested in students who are serious and who want to stay. And taking a course with me is great, but there's other ways to do that too.
We have two questions that came in that are excellent. One is, have you been involved with any excavations in Georgia, in particular the Indian mounds? And I'm going to add a question onto that, which is, given everything that is occurring in our world now with travel restrictions, and if one could imagine, not happily, that the travel restrictions might continue in the future, would it cause you to think about a shift or maybe a parallel universe of research that you could do domestically, including the Georgia Indian mounds?
So the Indian mounds, let's start with that. I visited them. I'm not involved with the scientific exploration of them. Oddly, my previous excavation in Germany before I came to KSU was a Celtic burial mound. So I'm really excited by these earthworks that we have here in Georgia. In fact, just last weekend, I went for a hike at Fort Mountain, which has a stone circle going around it. And this is maybe a good segue into Phaedra's question. So when I looked at Fort Mountain, I thought that looks just like a Celtic hill fort. It's not, of course, but maybe there are ideas that people who work in classical archaeology have, who work in Roman archaeology have, that might actually contribute to the archaeology of North America, even though that's not my area of training. So I don't know what the future is going to bring. I really hope your prediction proves untrue. I hope we're back to international travel by next summer at the very latest. But if I end up getting involved in excavations here, I'd welcome that. I think we have a real wealth of both Native American industrial archaeology and other sites here in Georgia that offer a myriad of opportunities to KSU students and to researchers.
Yeah, no, please no. I want us back fully functioning. But I'm also a plan B, C, and D girl if I have to be. So
yeah, I think you're right. And for now, the plan is work on publications, and then if this turns out to be longer term, we'll see what happens.
Another question that came in: are there some standard health precautions that need to be taken during such digs?
Yeah. So you should have your tetanus shots lined up, just in case you step on a nail or something like that. But we're actually in no danger of malaria. There's no poisonous snakes. So there's no need for any of the kind of extreme health preparations that you might need in an excavation in the jungle, for example. We're in a fairly civilized area. We have a first aid plan. We have an emergency plan. We know where the next hospital and doctor is. We've never really needed it as of yet. I've never had anything more than a stubbed toe. We try and follow fairly rigid safety protocols as well when we're using certain tools. So in terms of pre-travel injections or anything like that, no, nothing like that, if that's what you mean.
So no pit of snakes, is that what you're saying, Phil?
No pit of snakes, no rolling boulders. Very disappointing, but lots of exciting finds like statues, spearheads, and lots of exciting technology like X-rays and ground penetrating radar.
We're just about ready to end. I challenged someone to come on with a hat as awesome as my own, and except for you, Phil, because I'm sure you have one with.
It's in the car. Oh, where is it?
I have a question, not a hat. This is
Okay,
Sabine
go
Smith,
ahead.
and I'm in German studies, and I'm interested in asking a cultural question. And
Yeah.
I'm not an archaeologist, obviously, but I wonder whether archaeologists around the world speak the same language, or whether you and your students have encountered also differences when you work with your partners in Germany and in Italy. Can you comment on that, and whether there are any differences? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question. My first dig, we actually had a dictionary of archaeological terms, but it turns out we didn't. Oh, there we go. That's as best I can get. It turns out we didn't need it too much. The technical terms the students were not using so much when they were speaking to the Germans. They were speaking about more interesting things. So one of the great things is we have this cultural exchange. Thus far, that's been with volunteers and the staff of Terex mostly, and their workers. That's been really wonderful. I'm hoping in the next year we're going to have students from another university in Germany get involved as well, and then we'll have our archaeology students interacting with German archaeology students, and that'll be really exciting. So stay tuned for more developments on the cultural front.
Okay, I'm going to take that as the last question for today. And I just want to say thank you so much, Phil. I know it took a considerable amount of time this last week, or 2 weeks rather, to pull together the materials for today. So I really appreciate your time, especially given the fact that we were in the middle of finals, and we were in the middle of doing so many things to wrap up the semester. So I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much to you and to Heather and Joelle as well for their getting this prepared.
Yep, thank you. And so for the rest of you who have participated throughout this lovely season, we have another great show next week. So next week we'll be featuring a faculty member from the Wellstar College, and this faculty member is Katie Ingram. And Katie is amazing, and she is doing some very interesting research on transgenerational health focused on obesity and diabetes and pregnancy. And she is a research rock star, and we are looking forward to hosting her next week. So with that, I'm going to tip my hat and say thank you all for attending, and I hope you all have a safe and healthy and happy weekend, and we'll see you here next week. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Philip.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.